All right. So as I say, I'm now Senior Counsel at Cicero AMO, and I'm delighted to be speaking to you today. A, as it's a great conference to be at, but B, because it's my first day in this role. As it's just been said that women are underrepresented in senior levels in communications. And we heard some statistics a moment ago, which are fairly shocking, I think, in 2020. And I was asked to look at understanding why women are underrepresented in senior positions. 64% of employees in PR are women, but fewer than 30% of them are in leadership positions, which I think it shows there's still a long way to go until there is equality. It's not just in PR and communications, I have to say. I spent the majority of my career in broadcasting, and there's a massive way to go in broadcasting. When you start out, there are many more women than men, and then as you go further up the ranks, that closes off. And we saw the new Director General, Tim Davie, join the BBC yesterday. He's obviously got a lot on his plate at the moment, but it does show us that there will not be a female Director General of the BBC, the nation's largest broadcaster, for some years to come. So that's still one obstacle to climb. So what obstacles do women in PR still face in achieving leadership positions? I think one of them is unconscious bias, in which people at the top of organisations tend to recruit in their own image. So if men have been at the top of organisations generally, they tend to recruit other men like them. And I know people think the old boys club has gone away, but I have to say throughout my career in the BBC, I did find that there were certain pockets of that organisation where it was still very much which university did you go to, and if it wasn't Oxbridge, then you weren't quite part of the gang. Lack of equal pay is another issue. I think we touched on a moment ago the gender pay gap. It's been a big issue in broadcasting, in the media. We've seen about Carrie Gracie, who's just left the BBC. She won her equal pay claim, Samira Ahmed. But they had to go through pretty grueling battles to get equality, which I don't think we should have to be doing in this day and age. Lack of equal opportunity. Many women take time out of work for obvious reasons. They might have children, they might have childcare responsibilities, and then they come back and find they've been leapfrogged by men that they were working alongside at the same level. And a lack of role models. And I know it is a bit of a cliche, but you cannot be what you cannot see. And if there aren't people above you in an organisation who are successful women, women from ethnic backgrounds, etc., then you're less likely to think that that's an option for you. Now, I wanted to talk today a bit about my own experiences throughout my career. And in terms of role models, it was a strong woman that really got me into broadcasting, because I was watching the first Gulf War coverage avidly because my father was a pilot. And I saw Kate Adie on day in, day out, and I had no desire whatsoever to join the armed forces, but I thought, well, I could be a war correspondent. I have to say, there's no spoiler, I never did become a war correspondent. The closest I got to was politics, but that did set me on the path of my career. And when I was graduating, I applied for all the BBC trainee schemes, so BBC, ITN, etc. And I got to the final rounds of them all, and I never quite got over the finishing line, if you like. And I was doing work experience at the BBC. I suppose these days you'd call it being an intern. But while I was there, I got sent to cover a court case with Clive Myrie. And he was saying, well, what's the next plan? Because I said I hadn't got the traineeship. And I said, well, I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm going to do now. And he said, well, I started out in Bristol. It's a great place. You should go there. And I can only put it down to the sort of naivety and confidence of youth, because I'd never been to Bristol before, but I did write to the head of radio programmes and said I'd like a job, and he wrote back and offered me a contract. So I ended up going to Bristol, and I was working on the local radio station. And I'd see the alumni, because the BBC trainee scheme, where they took 12 a year from the nations and regions, they were all on the walls. So there's Sophie Rayworth and Lisa Mazumba, Jane Hill, Damien Grammaticus, all very successful. And I kept thinking, well, that's where I would have been if I'd got onto the trainee scheme. But I suppose in a case of right place, right time, I actually found out that while I was there, the trainee scheme was based in Bristol, and the Northwest candidate had dropped out at the last minute. So I became a very late substitute, like I found out on Friday and I started on the Monday. But that started my career at the BBC, and I was there for almost 20 years. And you can see here, I was a political correspondent in Scotland there. I'm outside the High Court in Edinburgh in the black and white picture, and then outside Westminster in the other photos. So it was a great career, really exciting. I mean, I've interviewed every Prime Minister from Tony Blair, David Cameron, Theresa May. I've interviewed Boris Johnson, and, you know, covered everything from Brexit to, you know, the Scottish referendum. And, you know, I really did enjoy that job. But latterly, I was political editor for BBC South East. And I realised that looking around me when I went to party conferences, I was the only female political editor out of 14 nations and regions. Now, remember, this is before Laura Kuenssberg became the national political editor. And we'd queue up to interview, it was David Cameron at the time. And it's a bit like one of those Hollywood junkets where you all queue up and you get 3 minutes with them, and then they bring down the clapperboard and you move on. But I was the only woman out of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and all the English regions. And somehow that didn't really feel right to me. And I felt that the BBC had a long way to go. And obviously since then, they have tackled it. And Laura Kuenssberg is, you know, ubiquitous on our television now. And they've got many more women coming through, which is great. But I also realised that I was lower paid than my male counterparts. And I decided to raise this, and it was long before the Carrie Gracie case. And I went to my boss and I went to HR, and I kind of just thought they would see that that wasn't fair and there would be parity. And I suppose that was naive of me. I was told there was no case to answer, and, you know, they said different people brought different levels of experience. And, you know, while I accept that, it was a bit of a blow. And I thought, well, do I stay here feeling slightly disgruntled, or what happens next? And actually, I was approached by the Federation of Small Businesses when I went to the party conference seasons in Manchester. And when I was offered the position of head of media, I thought, well, you know, I'm going to take the leap. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't daunting, but I became head of media, and the skills are very much transferable. It's a well-trodden path from broadcasting to PR and comms. And you can see here, I quickly became an FSB media spokesman on local radio, BBC, on breakfast television with Ben Thompson there, on ITV National News with Libby Vina. So it was a pretty busy and fulfilling role. And at that stage, I thought, gosh, this is pretty good. You know, I'd just been promoted. Within 3 months, they promoted me to head of communications, and everything seemed to be going pretty well. And I felt vindicated for making the change in my career. But I was feeling a bit under the weather. And I went to my GP and said, you know, I'm tired all the time. You know, and the response was, well, who isn't? And it's probably down to your new job, and it's probably down to commuting, etc. But I instinctively knew it was something more than that. And I was sent for some tests, and I was told that I had breast cancer. I had a tumour in the left side, and that was pretty terrifying, you know, and I'd only been in my new role for sort of just over 3 months, and you're worrying about how work's going to carry on without you, and you've just been promoted, etc. But you really don't have time to worry, because you get caught into the cancer system, which if anyone who's been there will know, it's sort of a barrage of tests. And this is me before my first MRI test. And the results of that came through on my birthday, the 10th of August. And the surgeon called me and said they'd found 2 more tumours, this time in the other side. So I'd gone from starting a new career and feeling really positive to suddenly finding out I've got 2 different types of breast cancer at the same time. So that was a really difficult time. And I think then you have to dig deep and you find out how resilient you really are. Because the next few months were really tough as I went through treatment, and I was concerned about work, etc. But I finished my treatment at the end of December. and returned to work at the beginning of January. With hindsight, I think that was really a bit too quick, but I've always been determined to sort of get back to my career and not let cancer define me. I was also determined to use my experience to raise the issue of early diagnosis and use my profile, if you like. And this photograph was taken the day after I finished radiotherapy, so I looked jolly well. I think he was a great photographer, actually. But it was an opportunity to sort of get the sort of advice out there and to raise the awareness. I've also been a volunteer for Cancer Research UK for the past 3 years, and it's one of the most fulfilling things I've done. So I really wanted a positive to come out of my experience, and I think it has. And I went back to work very quickly, as I say, but I was, just after returning to work here in the first photograph, I was named one of the most influential people in PR in 2018, and then again in 2019 and 2020. So I think that that also was vindication of my choice to go back to work quickly after my treatment. However, in another blow, I have to say, after this photo was taken, the last one in March 2020, I lost my job as Director of Communications at the FSB. And I would say I'm a pretty resilient person, but it's quite hard when you're applying for jobs. I've never been out of work before. You're just getting flat rejections or worse, no response at all. So it was a pretty difficult time. And one evening when I was sitting at home, I thought to myself, well, what would I advise someone to do in my situation? I really have to change the strategy, if you like. So I decided to post on LinkedIn. And I did this post, which was the photo of me at the PR Week event. And I said, not long after this photo was taken, I lost my job. And I said, I'm an experienced director of communications, and I'm looking for new opportunities. I did it kind of on the spur of the moment, and I wasn't wholly expecting anything much to come out of it. I mean, I've used LinkedIn, but not terribly much. And when I have used it, posts have maybe had a couple of hundred views, etc. But when I did this, something quite incredible and quite magical happened. This post had 20,000 views within a couple of days, but it wasn't just people viewing it. People were engaging with it. People I'd never met before, people from throughout my career in BBC Scotland, in Westminster, people through my PR career, connections in Parliament, MPs, etc. And some sent me suggestions of jobs I might be interested in. Some sent me, contacts of people who might be looking for freelance support, etc. And of itself, some people just sent supportive messages, which was really important because I did have to rebuild my confidence after losing my job. And much to my surprise, it worked. And within a couple of days of the post, I was offered freelance contracts by people I'd worked with at the BBC and FSB. But there were bits and pieces here and there, and I really did feel that I needed something more concrete. And then I had a conversation with the people at Cicero by Zoom, and then they asked me to go into their London office, which was the first time I'd been to London since lockdown, and they offered me the position of senior counsel, which I'm really excited about because it plays to my strength, both in communications, but also with my political background and campaigning and lobbying experience. So I'm genuinely excited about it. It's a new start at an exciting company and a chance to add to my skills and experience. I've never worked in agency before, so I think that's going to be exciting. And I've learned a valuable lesson that you can be going along in life thinking everything is fine, feeling quite confident, and then something comes along and just knocks you sideways. And it's up to us as individuals how we react to that situation. And no one can really get you over that but yourself. So I think I've learned a few things along the way about how to tackle the cultural and practical obstacles to leadership for women. These are not exhaustive, but my top tip is to find a mentor. And I think that people always assume that's something you do at the start of your career. I actually found a mentor last year Jennifer Thomas through the brilliant Women in PR scheme, which I would recommend anyone, if you're not a member, do join. And they run this fantastic scheme which pairs people, you know, from different backgrounds and, you know, different levels. And I think that was really successful for me, thinking about how to move on in my career, and sort of just honing my CV and thinking about what was next. I'd say never stop networking. And I would have said I wasn't really a networker prior to lockdown. And actually, I think lockdown's been brilliant, because I have since networked with people who I've never met before. They reached out after my LinkedIn post. We got in touch, we've had a virtual coffee or cup of tea, and I've made so many contacts. And I think that the contacts that I've had through social media, through LinkedIn, have really been instrumental in me finding the work, whether it was freelance or whether it's this job now with Cicero. So that's so important. I'd say mind the gap. And I don't just mean the equal pay gap, I mean the confidence gap. I think so often, men will see, I know it sounds cliched, but it's still the case, you know, men will see a role, and I found this with male friends of mine who were forwarding roles to me, and I was thinking, wow, I don't really have all of those skills, you know, and they would say, oh yeah, but you've got most of them. I think men are very willing to put themselves forward for senior positions, thinking, well, you know, I've got most of this and the rest I can learn. And I think women lack the confidence and probably don't push themselves forward. So make sure it's not yourself that's holding you back. I think men and senior women really need to be the champions of change. I think in organisations, if you have women at more senior levels, it is your job to sort of, you know, hold the ladder down, help other people coming behind you. And that leads to really, you've got to lead by example. And I think I'm sort of always go back to the quote by the former US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who said, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And I think that, you know, what I found with the mentoring scheme is it was a scheme for women, and the support within that group was really important. And I think that the other thing I was going to say is if you don't get onto an actual scheme, and I know some workplaces have them, don't be afraid to reach out just to someone you know, someone you perhaps admire. I've mentored quite a lot of younger women throughout my time at the BBC and then in communications, and I think people are very receptive to that, and it's just really great to have a sounding board of someone who's kind of been there and done that. And so that leads me to my final point, really. Just make sure you, and I know it's American, but pay it forward. I've been so grateful to those people who reached out to me, who supported me, who offered guidance, advice, you know, contacts when I've been looking for work just now. And I think it's our duty as people who are more senior in industry to make sure that we help others coming along. So if you can, and you see opportunities and you see where someone might make the most of those opportunities, I think it is really your responsibility to encourage them and pay it forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks for sharing your experience. That was incredibly powerful, and congratulations on your new role. Sorry I messed that up at the beginning. So we have you know, about 20 minutes for questions, and we've already got a question from Sarah Jane. Her question is, how can we overcome the misogyny that seems to surround women in the media? You mentioned Laura Kuenssberg. Regardless of political viewpoints, she seems to be attacked on a personal level much more frequently than any other political journalists. Is it just a case of sucking it up until there are more women around to combat it?
It shouldn't be, but I'm afraid, I mean, I worked with Laura. She's incredibly capable and robust, and it really frustrates me when I see the kind of reception she gets. And as you rightly point out, it's not how Nick Robinson was treated when he had her role before her. I think you do have to have very thick skin. Unfortunately, I found that in the media. I mean, when I was doing interviews with David Cameron or any of the leaders. I remember doing one with Nigel Farage when he was the UKIP leader, and somebody wrote in to complain about my dress being too short, and it wasn't. I wasn't at work in a miniskirt. I think that you do have to have a thick skin, which is a shame. We shouldn't really have to. And sometimes I think, gosh, Laura's obviously extremely passionate about what she does, but would you want that level of abuse every day? I mean, it's worse now, I think, because everyone feels they've got a right to comment on social media. We do need to see more women in those more senior roles, and we are seeing more of them come through, definitely. But I think until that's the norm, then they will still face that misogyny, as you say.
Thank you. Yeah, I think trolling is just becoming a lot worse, especially, I've seen some of the comments against Laura Kuenssberg, and it sort of pains me as a woman to read that kind of stuff. And what you just mentioned about your dress being too short, I mean, you would never say that to a man. You would never sort of attack their dress sense. It's just completely unprofessional.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, nobody would ever have commented about, Nick Robinson's haircut, for instance, whereas, during lockdown, I saw people saying, why hasn't Laura Kuenssberg covered her roots and things like that? And you think, really? This is the most important thing when we're talking about the coronavirus crisis. So I think, unfortunately, it's a fact of life that women do get a lot more abuse, and you do have to have a thick skin, and that's unfortunate because, that in itself probably does deter quite a lot of women going into certain roles.
Yeah, of course. Camilla has another question, and she's asked if you can share an example of how a mentor has supported you.
Absolutely. I had a great mentor, Jennifer Thomas, who was head of internal communications at Direct Line Insurance, so big corporate. So we used to meet once a month and talk about, I was hoping to move at some stage anyway, where I didn't hope to lose my job, but I had been there 4.25 years and was looking at the next possibility. And it's just great to have someone who's done that. She's worked in agencies, she's worked in a big corporate, because although I was director of communications, I came to communications in PR quite late. I'd been a correspondent before that. So just have someone say, well, think about this as an option. Think about what's your red line, what you really don't want to do. What are the things you would like to do? And I think that's really helpful. And I think when I was job hunting at the moment, it really helps if you know your mind and you think, that's something I feel really passionate about. I mean, I do a lot of volunteering for CR UK, and I'm really passionate about that. There are other things that I think in terms of comms that I may not feel so passionate about working in. And I think if you're doing it every day, it has to be something that you feel that you want to do. And I think that CR UK is really important to me on a personal level. FSB was important to me because I believe that small businesses, which make up, 5.8 million small businesses in the UK, and they do have a tough time, and they've had a much tougher time lately because of coronavirus, but I felt it was really something worthwhile. So you've got to look at what are your personal goals and what you hope to achieve through it.
Great. Actually, another question about mentoring, this time from Gina. She asked, do you think it's best to have a mentor that doesn't work with you, i.e. not in your team or department?
Yes, I do. I really do. And I would recommend that. And when I met Jennifer, we didn't know each other at all. So there's no sort of baggage. There's no, I think it's always great to have, I line managed a team at FSB. So it's great to have ongoing conversations about how your career can develop and what you should be looking at. But you can't have the kind of conversations that, I was saying to her, well, I've been there 4 years and I don't want to be there forever. So how do I, move on? What should I be looking at next? So I think it's really important, even if it's someone from another team, if you're in a bigger workplace. It wasn't very big at FSB, so there was nobody. And that's why a mentor was so important to me, because I reported into the CEO. So there was no one I could go to, if you like, who was on my level or above me, who I could just say, look, I'm finding this tough, or, I'm not sure what to do about this. So I think that to have someone that you can sound off to a bit, and that is, I don't want to use this cliche, but a safe space. It's not someone that's going to run back to your colleagues and say, oh, actually, she's looking for another job, or actually, she hates it here. I think it's really important if you can. And as I say, don't be afraid, even if it's not an actual scheme where you apply and you get appointed to a mentor, reach out to people that you have met in the past, someone you admire, and it doesn't have to be another woman. There can be men who give great advice, and obviously many of them are a more senior level in PR and comms, as we've seen. So I wouldn't be afraid to say, look, how did you get there? Because I want to do that too, and I'm stuck here and I don't know how to make that next move. So it's great if you can have a woman, because she'll be able to explain to you how she's navigated that. But, that's not the only way. And I think to have a male mentor, they might give you a different perspective. They might give you the confidence to go for positions that you wouldn't have gone for normally.
Yeah, I think I echo everything you said. I think it's great to find someone outside of your network, just to have that perspective that you wouldn't necessarily, get that same experience from. So definitely. Grace, do we have time for a few more questions?
Yes, so we have one about caring and one about equal pay. Maybe if we address both of them sort of briefly, and then we can move on to the next question, because
okay, great.
The final question in the next one.
Okay, great. So yeah, Grace talks about caring responsibilities, and they seem to impact women's careers more than men. How do you suggest that we help to combat this and level the playing field?
I'm really hopeful that the changes that have come around through coronavirus will be really helpful to equalising that, because the days of having to be in the office, presenteeism, you're at your desk before 9, etc., you don't leave till 6, have changed, and working practices have changed. Now, I know a lot of women had to take up the brunt of the homeschooling, etc., while this was all going on, but I do think more flexible working will be a big boon to women generally.
Great, and finally from Katie, you mentioned equal, or some might say fair pay, and the incredible battle it can be to acknowledge that between men and women. I feel that the no case to answer sometimes means we have no choice but to move on or face a long battle that takes its toll on our well-being. How do we stand strong on that point and show our true worth as a collective? I mean, I echo everything Katie just said, so.
Everything. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what I faced. I realised I was surrounded by men doing the same job as me, but for whatever reason, I wasn't deemed to be worth the same as them. And that came as a bit of a surprise, because I hadn't realised it before. And when I did realise it, and I made the inquiry, and I kind of, as I say, naively thought that HR were going to say, oh yes, there's a pay chart, and you should be on the higher level. When that didn't happen, as you point out, I chose to move on, which is a shame, because I'd been at the BBC 20 years. But I think we need to get to a stage where that doesn't happen, and where women are, and it is fair pay, not equal pay. I mean, if you're doing the same job, you should be paid the same.
Great. Thank you, Louise. I think we're going to move on to our next session, but I thought that was incredible. So thanks for sharing your experience, and actually some of the tips that you just shared are incredibly helpful, and I hope we can all implement them in our professional lives. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.